God saw all that he had made, and indeed it was very good. Sometimes the secular world helps the church to come to a better understanding of what is already there in its own teachings. I'm thinking right now of the environmental movement. Caring for the environment is not some wacky New Age movement. It's about some very old-fashioned morality. It can be summed up very briefly in 3 words: don't be selfish. Just to elaborate, think of future generations, walk gently on this earth, don't devour its limited resources or foul its air and water. This talk has 3 sections. In the first, I will look at what the Bible has to say about the environment. And in the second, I will go through Laudato Si, the encyclical letter issued by Pope Francis in 2015. And after that, I will look at how poets have expressed their love for the natural world. In its account of creation, the book of Genesis repeatedly says of God's work, God saw that it was good. Until finally on the 6th day after the creation of man, it says, God saw all that he had made, and indeed it was very good. This creation included light and darkness, water, vegetation, plants bearing seed in their several kinds, and trees bearing fruit with their seed inside in their several kinds, sun, moon, and stars, the waters teeming with living creatures, birds flying above the earth. And God said, let the earth produce every kind of living creature, cattle, reptiles, and every kind of wild beasts. God gave man stewardship over the creatures of the earth, be masters of the fish of the sea, the birds of heaven, and all living animals on the earth. And he asked the man to name all the cattle, all the birds of heaven, and all the wild beasts. God was then surely giving the human race a responsibility to care for these living creatures, not a license to wipe them off the face of the earth. I have a tray in my kitchen that I got some years ago, and it's full of biblical references to plants and fruits, complete with drawings of them. And I checked the references recently, and they are accurate. And here's some of the plants and fruits mentioned on that tray: olives, almond tree, fig leaves, wool and flax, cedar of Lebanon, cypress, mint and dill and cumin, hyssop, manna that tasted like coriander or like wafers made with honey. The tray also mentions a verse in the Song of Songs, but here's the full passage. She is a garden enclosed, my sister, my promised bride, a garden enclosed, a sealed fountain. Your shoots form an orchard of pomegranate trees. The rarest essences are yours, nard and saffron, calamus and cinnamon, with all the incense-bearing trees, myrrh and aloes, with the subtlest odours, fountains that make the garden fertile, well of living water, streams flowing down from Lebanon. Awake, north wind, come, wind of the south, breathe over my garden to spread its sweet smell around. Let my beloved come into his garden, let him taste its rarest fruits. I come into my garden, my sister, my promised bride. I gather my myrrh and balsam. I eat my honey and my honeycomb. I drink my wine and my milk. Eat, friends, and drink. Drink deep, my dearest friends. Here are some more texts from the Old Testament. Psalm 8 speaks of the wonders of the created universe and of our place in it. When I see the heavens, the work of your hands, the moon and the stars which you arranged. What is man that you should keep him in mind, mortal man that you care for him? Yet you have made him little less than a god. With glory and honour you crowned him, gave him power over the works of your hands, put all things under his feet, all of them, sheep and cattle, yes, even the savage beasts, birds of the air and fish that make their way through the waters. We recite this next passage and much more from the prophet Daniel during morning prayer on Sunday of week 1 in the divine office. And you, sun and moon, O bless the Lord. And you, the stars of the heavens, O bless the Lord. And you, showers and rain, O bless the Lord. And you, all you breezes and winds, O bless the Lord. And you, fire and heat, O bless the Lord. And you, cold and heat, O bless the Lord. O let the earth bless the Lord. And you, mountains and hills, O bless the Lord. And you, all plants of the earth, O bless the Lord. And you, fountains and springs, O bless the Lord. And you, rivers and seas, O bless the Lord. And you, creatures of the sea, O bless the Lord. And you, every bird in the sky, O bless the Lord. And you, wild beasts and tame, O bless the Lord. To him be highest glory and praise forever. Moving on to the New Testament, for no particular reason, I will focus on Matthew's Gospel. And I want to emphasize how much the natural world features in this Gospel. The Magi are led by a star to the infant King of the Jews, and they bring gifts of gold, frankincense, and myrrh. John the Baptist wears a garment of camel hair with a leather belt. His food is locusts and wild honey. John the Baptist uses vivid imagery. The axe is laid to the roots of the trees. He says of the one who is coming after him, his winnowing fan is in his hand. He will clear his threshing floor and gather his wheat into the barn, but the chaff he will burn in a fire that will never go out. In the Sermon on the Mount, Jesus tells us, you are the salt of the earth. You are the light of the world. We are to pray, give us this day our daily bread. He continues, look at the birds in the sky. They do not sow or reap or gather into barns, yet your heavenly Father feeds them. He contrasts a house built on rock and a house built on sand. And the Gospel continues with incidents such as the calming of the storm, the demoniacs and the pigs. Jesus speaks of the lost sheep of the house of Israel. The disciples cause offence by picking and eating corn on the Sabbath. Both John the Baptist and Jesus use the phrase brood of vipers. And the parables of Jesus are full of imagery from the world of nature. The sower going out to sow, the darnel, the mustard seed, the yeast, the treasure and the pearl, the dragnet, the vineyard, the fig tree. And then there are the miracles of the loaves and fishes and the yeast of the Pharisees and Sadducees. On Palm Sunday, the people were cutting branches and spreading them in the path of Jesus. Addressing the holy city, Jesus says, Jerusalem, Jerusalem, how often have I longed to gather your children, as a hen gathers her chicks under her wings, and you refused. Speaking of the coming of the Son of Man, he says, the sun will be darkened, the moon will lose its brightness, the stars will fall from the sky, and the powers of heaven will be shaken. The institution of the Eucharist of the Mass features bread and wine. This is my body, this is my blood. Peter's denial is foretold. The cock crows. Christ's agony takes place in the Garden of Gethsemane. At his crucifixion, we are told of the crown of thorns and of a reed, and wine mixed with gall. At the death of Jesus, there was darkness over all the land. The earth quaked. The rocks were split. And he's buried in a tomb hewn out of the rock. After his resurrection, his disciples went to meet Jesus on a mountain. Here is some more New Testament imagery. The dominant images in John's Gospel are of light and darkness. For example, in the great prologue, water welling up to eternal life, bread feeding the hungry, and the living bread that has come down from heaven. And the vine, I am the true vine, and my Father is the vine dresser. Every branch of mine that bears no fruit he takes away, and every branch that does bear fruit he prunes that it may bear more fruit. In John's account of the resurrection, Mary of Magdala meets the risen Christ in the garden alongside where his tomb was, and initially thinks he is the gardener. In his first letter to the Corinthians, St. Paul uses the image of sowing a grain of wheat in the ground as a symbol of death and resurrection. The Bible presents us with a vision of an abundance of life on this planet Earth. It luxuriates in its references to the natural world. Its account of the story of our creation and redemption is rooted in the reality of the world in which we live. Surely it is unbiblical of us, to say the least, to destroy many of these species and foul this planet through our thoughtlessness and selfishness. Pope Francis issued his encyclical letter Laudato Si on care for our common home in May 2015. The letter takes its title from the words of St. Francis of Assisi, whose love for God's creation makes him an ideal patron for this cause. Praise be to you, my Lord, through our sister Mother Earth, who sustains and governs us, and who produces various fruits with coloured flowers and herbs. Pope Francis says of the man whose name he took when he was elected our Holy Father, he was a mystic and a pilgrim who lived in simplicity and wonderful harmony with God, with others, with nature, and with himself. He shows us just how inseparable the bond is between concern for nature, justice for the poor, commitment to society, and interior peace. And the Holy Father goes on to quote the ecumenical patriarch Bartholomew of Constantinople. For human beings to destroy the biological diversity of God's creation, for human beings to degrade the integrity of the earth by causing changes in its climate, by stripping the earth of its natural forests or destroying its wetlands, for human beings to contaminate the earth's waters, its land, its air, and its life, these are sins. For to commit a crime against the natural world is a sin against ourselves and a sin against God. Pope Francis goes on to say, the earth, our home, is beginning to look more and more like an immense pile of filth. The human environment and the natural environment deteriorate together. We cannot adequately combat environmental degradation unless we attend to the causes related to human and social degradation. For example, the depletion of fishing reserves especially hurts small fishing communities without the means to replace those resources. Water pollution particularly affects the poor who cannot buy bottled water. And rises in the sea level mainly affect impoverished coastal populations who have nowhere else to go. A sense of deep communion with the rest of nature cannot be real if our hearts lack tenderness, compassion, and concern for our fellow human beings. It's clearly inconsistent to combat trafficking in endangered species while remaining completely indifferent to human trafficking, unconcerned about the poor, or undertaking to destroy another human life deemed unwanted. When we fail to acknowledge as part of reality the worth of a poor person, a human embryo, a person with disabilities, to offer a few examples, it becomes difficult to hear the cry of nature itself. Everything is connected. There can be no renewal of our relationship with nature without a renewal of humanity itself. Human beings cannot be expected to feel responsible for the world unless at the same time their unique capacities for knowledge, will, freedom and responsibilities are recognized and valued. Our relationship with the environment can never be isolated from our relationship with others and with God. Otherwise, it would be nothing more than romantic individualism dressed up in ecological garb, locking us in a stifling immanence. The notion of the common good also extends to future generations. Once we start to think about the kind of world we're leaving to future generations, we look at things differently. We realize that the world is a gift which we have freely received and must share with others. Intergenerational solidarity is not optional, but is rather a basic question of justice, since the world we have received also belongs to those who will follow us. Doomsday predictions can no longer be met with irony or disdain. We may well be leaving to coming generations debris, desolation, and filth. Pope Francis quotes his predecessor, Pope Benedict XVI, "The external deserts in the world are growing because the internal deserts have become so vast." And Pope Francis continues, "For this reason, the ecological crisis is also a summons to a profound inner conversion. Living our vocation to be protectors of God's handiwork is essential to a life of virtue." We need to take up again an ancient lesson found in different religious traditions and also in the Bible. It is the conviction that less is more. A constant flood of new consumer goods can baffle the heart and prevent us from cherishing each thing and each moment. Christian spirituality proposes a growth marked by moderation and a capacity to be happy with little. It is a return to that simplicity which allows us to stop and appreciate the small things, to be grateful for the opportunities which life affords us, to be spiritually detached from what we possess, and not to succumb to sadness for what we lack. The Holy Father speaks of an attitude of heart, one expression of which is when we stop to give thanks to God before and after meals. I ask all believers to return to this beautiful and meaningful custom. That moment of blessing, however brief, reminds us of our dependence on God for life. It strengthens our feeling of gratitude for the gifts of creation. It acknowledges those who, by their labours, provide us with these goods. And it reaffirms our solidarity with those in greatest need. The Holy Father quotes St. John of the Cross, referring to God as "my beloved." Mountains have heights, and they are plentiful, vast, beautiful, graceful, bright, and fragrant. These mountains are what my beloved is to me. Lonely valleys are quiet, pleasant, cool, shady, and flowing with fresh water. In the variety of their groves and in the sweet song of the birds, They afford abundant recreation and delight to the senses, and in their solitude and silence they refresh and give rest. These valleys are what my beloved is to me. Speaking of the sacraments, Pope Francis continues, the sacraments are a privileged way in which nature is taken up by God to become a means of mediating supernatural life. Water, oil, fire, and colours are taken up in all their symbolic power and incorporated into our act of praise. Water poured over the body of a child in baptism is a sign of new life. Encountering God does not mean fleeing from this world or turning our back on nature. Now I'm going to talk about poetry. Poets have expressed a profound love for the natural world. Writing in the 17th century, Andrew Marvell unwittingly gave the modern environmental movement its other name. He speaks of a green thought in a green shade. Here's a verse from that poem, Thoughts in a Garden. What wondrous life is this I lead? Ripe apples drop about my head. The luscious clusters of the vine upon my mouth do crush their wine. The nectarine and curious peach into my hands themselves do reach. Stumbling on melons as I pass, ensnared with flowers, I fall on grass. This is the first verse of Ode to Autumn by John Keats. Season of mists and mellow fruitfulness, close bosom friend of the maturing sun, conspiring with him how to load and bless with fruit the vines that round the thatch eaves run, to bend with apples the mossed cottage trees, and fill all fruit with ripeness to the core, to swell the gourd and plumb the hazel shells with a sweet kernel, to set budding more and still more late flowers for the bees, until they think warm days will never cease, for summer has o'erbrimmed their clammy cells. Edward Thomas was born in 1878 in Lambeth in South London, but much of his poetry is about the countryside, particularly in southern England. He had been a prose writer and a critic, and only began writing poetry in 1914. He was killed during the First World War in the Battle of Arras, France, in April 1917. The title of this poem is Digging. Today I think only with sense dead leaves yield, and bracken, and wild carrot seed, and the square mustard field. Odours that rise when the spade wounds the root of tree, rose, currant, raspberry, or goutweed, rhubarb, or celery. The smoke smell, too, flowing from where a bonfire burns, the dead, the waste, the dangerous, and all to sweetness turns. It is enough to smell, to crumble the dark earth, while the robin sings over again sad songs of autumn mirth. And the final verses are from a poem by Seamus Heaney, who died in 2013. It's about the adventures of a character called Mad Sweeney, who is turned by a saint into a bird. And here he sings the praises of trees. The bushy, leafy oak tree is highest in the wood. The forking shoots of hazel hide sweet hazelnuts. The alder is my darling, all thornless in the gap, some milk of human kindness coursing in its sap. The blackthorn is a jagged creel, stippled with dark sloes. Green watercress in thatch on wells, where the drinking blackbird goes. Sweetest of the leafy stalks, the vetches strew the pathway. The oyster grass is my delight, and the wild strawberry. Low-set clumps of apple trees drum down fruit when shaken. Scarlet berries clot like blood on mountain rowan. Briars curl in sideways, arch a stickle back, draw blood, and curl up innocent to sneak the next attack. The yew tree in each churchyard wraps night in its dark hood. Ivy is a shadowy genius of the wood. I hope these great poets will have conveyed to us their love for the natural world in which we live. Much of the life that they speak so eloquently of is now threatened by the manner in which we are treating this planet. Pope Francis ends Laudato Si with a double prayer. And I will end this talk by reading a section of that prayer. All-powerful God, you are present in the whole universe and in the smallest of your creatures. You embrace with your tenderness all that exists. Pour out upon us the power of your love, that we may protect life and beauty. Fill us with peace, that we may live as brothers and sisters, harming no one. O God of the poor, help us to rescue the abandoned and forgotten of this earth, so precious in your eyes. Bring healing to our lives, that we may protect the world and not prey on it, that we may sow beauty, not pollution and destruction. Tryon, Lord, wondrous community of infinite love, teach us to contemplate you in the beauty of the universe. For all things speak of you. Awaken our praise and thankfulness for every being that you have made. Give us the grace to feel profoundly joined to everything that is. God of love, show us our place in this world as channels of your love for all the creatures of this earth, for not one of them is forgotten in your sight. O Lord, seize us with the power of you, with your power and light. Help us to protect all life, to prepare for a better future, for the coming of your kingdom of justice, peace, love and beauty. Praise be to you. Amen.